The most dangerous book Nietzsche ever read was not written by a famous philosopher. It was written by a man who killed himself the day it was published. His name was Philipp Mainländer. His thesis, God had committed suicide, and the universe is what remains. The slow decomposition of a divine corpse. This video traces a confrontation that never happened in person between Mainländer's philosophy of cosmic entropy and Nietzsche's most famous idea, the eternal return. Two threads will run through everything that follows. First, can a philosophy that says yes to life only be forged by someone who has stared into one that says no? Second, is the eternal return an argument or a weapon designed to destroy one specific enemy? To understand what Nietzsche was fighting, we need to begin with the man he was fighting against. Philipp Mainländer was born in 1841 in Offenbach, Germany. He read Schopenhauer at 17, and the experience shattered him. Not because he disagreed, but because he believed Schopenhauer had not gone far enough. Schopenhauer had said that the will, the blind force driving all existence, was the root of suffering. The answer was resignation, quieting the will, letting it exhaust itself. Mainländer took the premise and radicalized it. If the will is the source of all suffering, why does it exist at all? What caused it? He proposed an answer that would have horrified Schopenhauer. God existed, Mainländer argued, once, a unified, transcendent being. But God's deepest desire was not to create. It was not to be. God could not simply cease to exist directly. Such a being cannot simply vanish. So God shattered himself into multiplicity. The Big Bang, if you like, as divine suicide. The universe, in Mainländer's metaphysics, is the afterlife of God. Every star, every organism, every thought, debris from a self-inflicted wound. And every fragment of this shattered God carries within it the same drive that caused the original act, the will to not be, the will zum Tode, the will to die. Consider what this means. You feel it, don't you? A strange recognition. Every act of decay, every exhaustion, every moment where you simply want to stop. Mainländer would say that is the residue of the original divine impulse running its course through you. He called his masterwork Die Philosophie der Erlösung, the philosophy of redemption. Redemption not through salvation, but through annihilation. On April 1st, 1876, the book appeared in print. That same night, Mainländer hanged himself in his apartment. He used stacked copies of his own book as a stepping stool. The obvious objection rises immediately. A man who kills himself proves nothing about the universe. His philosophy might simply be a symptom. But that objection, however tempting, misses something crucial. Mainländer's argument does not depend on his death. It depends on thermodynamics, on entropy, on the observable fact that every closed system tends toward disorder. The universe is cooling, stars are dying, energy dissipates. If the arrow of time points toward heat death, then Mainländer's metaphor is not merely poetic. The universe really does behave as if it is winding down, as if its deepest tendency is to stop. Now we reach the confrontation. Nietzsche encountered Mainländer's work in the late 1870s. We know this because his personal library preserved a copy, annotated, underlined, argued with in the margins. Nietzsche's reaction was visceral. In an unpublished note he called Mainländer, and here I quote, a sentimental apostle and his work, this effusive and revolting book. But disgust this intense is never indifference. You do not fill a book's margins with fury unless the book has touched something you need to protect. What did Nietzsche need to protect? Think about the timeline. In the early 1880s, Nietzsche was building his own metaphysics, and everything Mainländer had written threatened it at the root. Both men began from the same master. Both inherited Schopenhauer's insight that reality is driven by a blind, purposeless force. Both rejected Schopenhauer's quietism. But from that shared starting point, they walked in opposite directions. Mainländer said, "The will is real, and its deepest truth is that it wills its own destruction. Everything decays. Everything tends toward nothing. This is not a tragedy. It is a mercy." Nietzsche said, "The will is real, and its deepest truth is that it wills its own overcoming. Not death, but power. Not entropy, but eternal self-surpassing. The will to die versus the will to power. These are not merely competing theories. They are competing orientations toward existence itself." And Nietzsche knew that Mainländer's version had the weight of physics behind it. That is the problem Nietzsche faced. If the universe is entropic, if energy really does dissipate, if complexity really does tend towards simplicity, then Mainländer's metaphysics is not a mood. It is a description. How do you argue against entropy? How do you say yes to a universe that is measurably running out of energy? Ask yourself, if Mainländer's reading of physics is correct, what would a counter-argument even look like? Nietzsche's answer arrived in August of 1881, beside a lake in the Swiss Alps near Sils-Maria. He later described it as a thought that struck him like a bolt, 6,000 feet beyond man and time. The thought was this: what if the universe does not wind down? What if instead every moment that has ever existed will return, exactly as it was, an infinite number of times? The eternal return. In The Gay Science, section 341, Nietzsche introduces it not as a proof, but as a test. A demon comes to you in your loneliest hour and says, "This life, as you have lived it, you will have to live again, and innumerable times again." Every pain, every joy, every thought, every sigh, in the same order, the same sequence forever. Nothing new, nothing redeemed, nothing escaped. He asks, would you curse this demon, or would you call it the most divine thing you have ever heard? The question is not scientific. It is existential. It is a test of your relationship to your own life. But notice the structure. Against Mainländer's arrow, existence moving from something toward nothing, Nietzsche proposes a circle. Against entropy, recurrence. Against the line that ends, the ring that never does. This is not a coincidence. Read the two thinkers side by side, and the eternal return stops looking like an independent revelation and starts looking like a calculated inversion. Mainländer, the universe had a beginning, the death of God. Nietzsche, the universe has no beginning and no end. It cycles eternally. Mainländer, suffering is the evidence that existence is winding down. Nietzsche, suffering is the weight that gives eternal recurrence its gravity. Without it, the return would be trivial. Mainländer, the highest act is to will your own end, because that aligns you with the truth of the cosmos. Nietzsche, the highest act is to will the return of everything, including the worst of it. Point by point, the eternal return mirrors and inverts the philosophy of redemption. It is as if Nietzsche took Mainländer's architecture and built the same cathedral in reverse. But does inversion equal refutation? This is where the argument gets precarious, because Nietzsche never proved the eternal return. He could not. In his notebooks, the Nachlass, he attempted cosmological proofs. Finite energy, infinite time, therefore all configurations must repeat. The physics does not hold. Modern cosmology has largely dismissed it. And yet, the idea persists. Why? Because its power was never cosmological. Its power was psychological. It was always a weapon aimed at a specific kind of nihilism, the kind that says no to life because life ends. Here we arrive at the heart of it. What Nietzsche understood, perhaps better than anyone before or since, is that nihilism is not one thing. There are nihilisms, plural. Mainlander's nihilism is what Nietzsche would call passive. It observes the meaninglessness of existence and concludes, therefore, let it end. The will to die is the logical terminus. Nietzsche's counter, what he called active nihilism, observes the same void and says, therefore, let me create, not because creation has meaning, but because the act of creating is itself the only meaning that does not need to be given from outside. But is this fair to Mainlander? Can a will that wills its own annihilation still be called passive? After all, suicide requires an enormous act of will. Mainlander did not drift into death. He engineered it. This is a genuine crack in Nietzsche's framework. If the will to power means self-overcoming, and Mainlander overcame the most fundamental drive, the survival instinct, then, by Nietzsche's own logic, Mainlander's act was a supreme exercise of power. Nietzsche sensed this danger. In Zarathustra, Part 3, on the vision and the riddle, he stages the confrontation, not against a person, but against a figure. The dwarf, the spirit of gravity. The dwarf whispers, all that is straight lies. All truth is crooked. Time itself is a circle. And Zarathustra rejects him, not because the dwarf is wrong about the circle, but because the dwarf says it with contempt. This is Nietzsche's precise move. The eternal return is not about whether the cosmos literally repeats. It is about the attitude with which you face the possibility of repetition. Mainlander faces entropy and says, good, let it end. Nietzsche faces the same entropy and says, even if this all happens again, I will it. Is this a refutation? Or merely a preference dressed in metaphysics? The honest answer is uncomfortable. The eternal return does not disprove the will to die. It outwills it. Nietzsche's genius was not to defeat Mainlander's argument. It was to make Mainlander's argument irrelevant. By shifting the question from what is true about the cosmos to what is demanded of the person living in it. But we cannot leave it there, because there is a final irony that neither thinker could have foreseen, and it cuts against Nietzsche. Nietzsche collapsed into madness in January 1889. For the next 11 years, he existed without thought, without language, without will, cared for by his mother and then his sister, who falsified his legacy. The philosopher of the will to power spent his final decade in a state that Mainlander would have recognized instantly. A body winding down, a mind already gone, matter returning to entropy. Mainlander chose his exit at 34, fully conscious on his own terms. Nietzsche's exit was chosen for him by his own biology, slowly, over a decade without his consent. Who then exercised the will to power? The man who died standing, or the man who lived past the point where living meant anything? This is not a rhetorical trick. It is a genuine philosophical problem that Nietzsche's system cannot easily resolve. And yet, and this is the pivot, the eternal return survives, not as cosmology, not as physics, but as what Nietzsche always intended it to be, a filter, a way of sorting souls. Imagine you are told, this exact conversation, these exact words, your exact reaction to them. All of it will happen again, infinitely. Does that thought make you want to stop, or does it make you want to live more carefully? If your answer is stop, you are Mainlander's heir. If your answer is live more carefully, you have understood, at least provisionally, what Nietzsche was trying to build. We began with two threads. The first asked whether a philosophy of affirmation can only be forged by someone who has absorbed a philosophy of negation. The answer in Nietzsche's case is unambiguous. He read Mainlander. He internalized the argument, and the eternal return bears the negative imprint of the philosophy of redemption in every line. The second thread asked whether the eternal return is an argument or a weapon. It is both. It does not refute Mainländer's metaphysics. It refuses them. It meets the will to die, not with a proof, but with an opposing will, and bets everything on which will is stronger. Mainländer was the most honest pessimist who ever lived. He followed his logic to its final consequence, and did not flinch. Nietzsche was the most desperate affirmer who ever lived. He stared into the same void and demanded that it look away first. The void did not look away, but neither did he.